Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Give Me God of War walkthrough. We're on the hardest difficulty, and we're in Alfheim. And I sure hope you like Alfheim, because there's another 25 minutes of it. This is a pretty lengthy section. It's going to culminate in a boss fight, and the boss fight is pretty tricky, because he has a lot of HP, and you have to hit him quite a lot, but hopefully I'm going to give you some strategies that will make it a bit easier. But now that we froze the membrane that we froze in the previous video, we can now go towards the ringed temple. And there's going to be quite a lot of exposition here. You'll notice that I'm trying to trim out as much exposition as I can, trying to trim out as many moments that aren't necessarily needed to try and get you to the meat of the game. One of the strange aspects of this game is that regardless of whether or not you care about the story, you're going to have to face it every time you play it. And I would really love an anti-story mode, as rude as that is, because it's one of the things that's going to put people off replaying this game as much as they perhaps would want to. Just seemingly because you have to always see the story, and the story takes up a large chunk of time. That's the boss, by the way, the dude you just witnessed then. This is a really tricky fight coming up, guys, and I'm going to use Rage, I think. I'm also going to take a big hit, because it's going to be a spawning enemy, an enemy who specialises in spawning more enemies, and it's really tricky to isolate this guy because he runs away from you. So I take 2 big hits just then to get to this fella, and all I want to do is fuck him up. I don't care if I take damage, I don't care what it takes, all I want is this man, because if I can kill him, he will not spawn any more people. And I've got a bunch of footage of me fighting the people and him spawning like sets of new people, and it just got really annoying. So instead, my advantage to you there, guys, is just single him out, go for him and kill him. And it's very difficult to stop him summoning. You'd think it'd be way easier, but it's not. And then when he's dead, his buddies are easy. But the fact that he's always calling more people really gets frustrating, so it's worth the hits in my opinion. I think that fight just there, just because of the nature of that character's AI of running away from you and spawning enemies if you beat his friends up, one of the most frustrating encounters in the game. And it's fundamentally simple. 3 enemies, not too bad of an arena, nothing too crazy, but yeah, such an annoying enemy. And then the fight after this is also really annoying because it's suicide reavers, which are just another one of those designs which I wish didn't exist, but they do, so we have to deal with them. But here's another one of the membrane puzzles. It's going to give us the opportunity to open a chest, see if there's anything good in there, get some serpent scales or something, or maybe some Svartalheim, however you say it. There was a rare instance of me using the quick turn, which the quick turn is good, but the reason I don't think it's necessary is because of how good the sensitivity is in this game. They could have made it so the sensitivity was like Tomb Raider, and then I would be crying on every video about how it's a stupid idea and I hate them, but they didn't. They gave us amazing sensitivity. This game might have the fastest sensitivity outside of, you know, that stupid Call of Juarez game than any game I've played. It's incredibly quick, and I love that. Oh, by the way, guys, if you stand backwards here, when the reavers spawn, you can use Atreus to shoot them and kill most of them without aggroing them at all. They will float towards you, trying to get in range to see you, to proc and then explode. But if done correctly here, the boy will just shoot them, and they're quite passive, and he'll get rid of them without them blowing up. And I'm just throwing the axe in hopes that I might be able to clip 1 or 2 of them. But it's really just a very cowardly strategy that's very effective. And then there's this guy over here who's stunned against the wall. Wall stuns are very important in this game, because the enemy can't recover from them, and it gives you an opportunity to hit them without being attacked yourself. One of the things you'll notice about this difficulty is that the AI have a tendency, oh by the way, speaking of, there's the one that got away, comes, explodes, blinds me, does some damage, very annoying. Look how long the blind is as well. That's insane, dude. Absolutely insane how long that lasts. But in order to avoid that happening, just back up. If you back up, the boy can shoot them and they'll detonate instantly. My mistake there was I didn't realise there was one. I thought we'd got rid of them. But there's always one. That's kind of how reavers work. There's always one more. But we're alive, and we can make do with the HP that we have. We should be fine. And hopefully you did it better without, you know, getting damaged. Or you might have a bigger bar, so it doesn't matter as much. But one of the things that really struck me when I was recording this walkthrough, because it's a long one, guys, you're going to be here a while if you're interested in watching it, was just how much easier the game was the second time around. And it usually works this way, and it's a good thing, because it means you've got better at the game, right? But there's also that part of your brain that's wondering if they really touched it so much with the patches, because this game has had 9 patches. It hasn't even been out a week. It's fucking crazy, right? I can't believe how much they've patched it, and because the patch notes are so vague, it's really hard to tell what they've changed. It's really strange, and I'm not a fan at all, because I like precision, I like to know. And they have said that they've adjusted difficulty and adjusted the enemies, and they definitely have, because you can feel it, it's palpable, right? But we don't know exactly what they've done. So it leads to these weird placebo moments in your brain of being like, they've definitely touched that, or they've not touched this, or they've definitely changed that. That was way harder last time, or that was dead easier last time. They've definitely done something there. And you start being like some crazy conspiracy theorist person, because everything you're looking at, you're wondering if it's you or if it's the devs and what they've changed. And it leads to moments of grandeur and moments of, delusions of grandeur. And it's kind of interesting. But it has to be said, I think learning to play this game and learning to understand this game, because it was quite different, was one of the rougher experiences of a guide I've ever played. My first playthrough, a lot of people saw it. It was streamed. Most of it anyhow. And I got beat up a lot. I got demolished a lot. I had a hard time. And I never play as well on stream as I do off stream. It's just one of those things. I've accepted it. And it's a new game, so I didn't really know how to play it. But I had a really tough time. The game was incredibly difficult. And it was before they tweaked a lot of aspects of it as well. So when you add this all together, of, focusing on my chat more than focusing on the game, not knowing how to play the game, and the game in the roughest state it was in, all of those things culminated in an experience that was incredibly grueling and incredibly brutal. Just merciless. Every session worse than the last of just beatdowns and bullyings and having, a really tough time. But there's no better teacher, as rough as that is to say. There just isn't. Like, when it came to recording the walkthrough, because I'd walked that path of just nonsensical hell, everything felt different. Everything didn't feel as bad. And it's crazy just how much that's translated into the guide, and translated into the strategies, and translated into one of the cleanest walkthroughs I've made as far as recording runs go. Like, there was only 2 parts where I got, I'm not going to say stuck, but I was there a while. The third phase of Magni and Modai, which I knew was going to be bad because it's the hardest fight in the game, for bad reasons. And then the fight against the 2 bosses of this level, with the reavers. And the only reason I was on that for so long is because I wanted to do it cleanly. I wanted it to be spot on. And I kept taking chip damage from stupid shit. Like, I'd kill one of the bugs, and I'd be bullying the other bug, and then I'd not realise that one of the reavers wasn't dead, and he'd hit me with a projectile while I was charging the axe or something. Or I'd get hit coming out of the executioner's charge. Things like that. Like, really dodgy stuff. Oh, this is another moment where if you back up, guys, you can watch the reavers passively move towards you, and then you can just use them as target practice. The reason I'm doing this is because interrupting them when they fly towards you when they suicide can be very dangerous. You want to always do the R1 axe throw for the faster axe throw. You'll notice I never do the R1 axe throw. It's one of those things I just don't use. I'm much more favourable of the heavy axe throw, and I just do it for the damage, guys. When I was playing this game, as I was just talking about, and it was pre a lot of the patches and the tweaks and things, you didn't do a lot of damage, so maximising on damage was really important to me to make it feel like I was making a difference, and it just became one of those things, one of those habits that I've got now. And it can be useful to do the other throw, there's no denying that. A lot of people were asking on the early videos, can't you trip the enemies with the R1 throw at the legs? And you can do that, and that's a great strategy, but it doesn't work on the elites, guys. The elites get trip resistance, so the only way to trip them when they power up, and they power up a lot on this difficulty, is to hit them on the way back with the axe, or to hit them in the leg with the R1 throw when Atreus is grabbing them, because it changes their properties, remember? But other than that, it doesn't work. And I think a lot of people were just thinking I wasn't doing it, and maybe that's the difficulty that I was having. And I believe that potentially came from just an ignorance of this difficulty and what happens when the enemies level up. Because the enemies just become nightmares. And right now, all I'm trying to do here... Excuse me, wow, that came out of nowhere. Random dry throat. But all I'm trying to do there is keep them stunned so I can kill the guy before he summons any more enemies. Because I can't quite get to him in this cavalcade of flymen. And with the looks of that, he just summoned more dudes anyway, which is really frustrating, but that's what happens, because that's what this enemy does. And I really think that the enemy spawner should have way less HP. I think that should be how it works. He should be evasive, I'll give him that, but he should have so little HP that you can just fuck him up easily. Like, he's the dude that you freeze him, you run, you kick him, and he dies. Like, make it so that he dodges the axe really well, so you have to be really specific about it. Hit him with Atreus to stun him, and then axe him and things. But what a frustrating monster that is. But we did it. We got through it. It went pretty well. Grand scheme of things, I'm not too choked up about that one. It must be said, I'm not a big fan of Alfheim at all. I think this part of the game is one of the worst parts of it. I hated it on my first run. On my first run, it was just fucking miserable. I hated the enemies. I hated how they fight. I hated how they made me fight. Like, it was just a really, really, really tough time. But now, not so bad, actually. I got out through Alfheim pretty quickly, and I got the amulet, which is what we wanted, which is really important to the strategies of this video. So I was okay with it. Definitely. But there's another puzzle coming up here, and it's going to lead to a bunch of climbing sections that I'm going to trim out. This game is obsessed with this really awkward climbing, and I don't know why they've changed it, but they have. One of those strange aspects of the design. Like, I think it's easy to see what's improved, because I think almost everything's improved, right? The graphics are better. The game's sense of scale is larger. You know, the animations are really, really nice, really, really fluid, even if they're not quite as, you know, grisly and gore-stricken as the old ones. Tons of improvements there. The particle effects are majestic. The whole presentation is better and nicer. The combat is going to be a lot more subjective, whether or not you prefer it over the old ones, but it's still cohesive and well made. But then the climbing is just a massive step back, and I don't understand why. Because in the old God of Wars, you had a complete agency over it, and you could do it really quickly. And that was fun. Whereas in this game, it's like a loading screen. And the game never loads, unless you die, which I think is amazing. And it's really difficult to push the game so much to get a mid-level load, but I managed the other day, which was funny. And this section's really strange. I wanted to see if I could activate Rage and run past everybody and see how far you could get with it, but you'll notice, when you get attacked here, you don't take damage, as long as they do that weird push thing. As long as they do the weird push, you're fine. That weird push does no damage to you, even when it hits you. So you just keep spamming roll, and you don't take any damage, and I have no idea why. Which I'm glad, because this is one of those dumb cinematic moments, but that was one of those sections I was actually I wasn't looking forward to that mode at all. That's why I used Rage, because I thought it was going to be really dodgy. And then when I came out of it, I wasn't taking any damage, and I was really confused. I was like, oh, okay, that's weird.
It worked.
We can now make our
But once you've broken the frosty membraney thing, you're going to get access to the light arrows, which are going to make Atreus even more valuable than he already is. If you've made it this far in the game without using him, I would will you to do so. And I would will you to get good at pressing both square and R1 at the same time, so that you can sync up your attacks to do more damage. Additionally, you can even stagger them and alternate them. This works especially well in the air. For instance, if you want to do a longer charging move when an enemy is airborne, you want to use Atreus to keep them juggled. And I have a strategy against the final boss that enables you to land the 3 R1s into the R2, which is the big heavy slash, you know, big slam with the ice on it. But traditionally, you will never have enough time to land it. However, if you do 3 R1s, and then when you start doing the R2, start pressing square to stun him with the arrows, you'll land it every time. And even better, if you do 3 R1s and then hold the R2, you will cancel the big slam into the executioner's charge and do even more damage. And that's one of the combos that I'm going to do to him, and it's a really good one because it enables you to just keep on pecking away, and that's made possible because of Atreus. And there's a lot of instances of that. Atreus can keep all kinds of enemies at bay. He's fantastic against reavers, he's fantastic against the nightmares, he's just a fantastic asset, and it's easy to not want to use him, I get it completely. I'm even going to be doing a run where I don't use him intentionally, which is going to be miserable. I think I'm going to call it like Misery. That might be the name of it, something along those lines. But the truth remains, as I frame through the explosion of the the Nightmare, which is actually pretty tough to do. It's the second instance of difficult timing in this game. Which is funny because if you know God of War, you'll know that it is a much more casual action game. It's difficult, and you can make it insanely challenging, and it is very skillful and very rewarding, but it's always kind of been looked at as one of the easier games. It's, you know, it's disrespected a lot in many circles. Maybe not so much, you know, circles of people that like it, but more so the people that don't. And it's disrespected for reasons like that. But in this game, there are two instances of incredibly tight timing, which is, of course, the Amulet of Kavasa, which is, it's no Royal Guard, but it's pretty tight. And then dodging and iframing and getting through that explosion from the Nightmare is also a dodge that, you know, is very skillful to do. If you see somebody dodging through that and they only dodge once, you know that they timed it, and you know that that person has good timing. And that's one of those things you never really needed in the old God of Wars, because the parry window was so fucking wide you could trip over it and fall and die. And the blocking was so strong that you didn't even need to parry half the time. So that was definitely one of the things that I was really looking forward to them changing, and they did. And I'm grateful for that. Like, one of the things I like most about this game is that the block isn't safe. The block in the old games was so safe, it cuckolded the game. It made the game a joke. And the block in this game is still really, really strong, but they've designed enemies that go through it, and that's what was needed. There needed to be something that made you unsafe, but the enemies never had it. And they could have done that in the old games by giving the enemies a grab. It could have been escapable and a fair grab, but if you're blocking, they should grab you, right? And we all know what that looks like, because if you've played Ninja Gaiden, when you're blocking, they grab you. When you're not blocking, they grab you. When they're nowhere near you, they grab you. Like, those enemies are knobheads. And they're designed just like fighting game AI. Fighting game AI is the most evil AI ever conceived, because it doesn't give a shit about anything other than reading what you've done and pressing the one button that's fast enough to beat what you've done. And you know, if you come up against a fighting game character that has a grab, an SPD, whatever you want to call it, a 360, that is generally one of the fastest moves in the game. So they do that. So every time you're within range, they will beat you by grabbing you. And that's what the Ninja Gaiden enemies do. They use the move that's fastest to interrupt what you're doing. And it goes through everything. So that's why they love to grab. The grab is so crazy powerful. And they could have done that in God of War and made it so that the enemies had an option to get through Kratos' block. But at the same time, to stick and make it key to what God of War was, they could have made it so that if you reacted quick enough and did the right thing, you could reverse it. And then it would have been a whole new strategy of baiting grabs and reversing grabs. And then it would key into a lot of the more higher level play of God of War, which was, you know, using things like grabs, using fake grabs to predict moves, controlling enemies by using these certain moves that gave you iframes, using collision to do extra damage, keeping certain enemies propped up and other enemies stunned, you know, repeating things like the plume hits to get the bounce and things, and isolating and essentially just stealing the balls from enemies that would normally be quite dangerous. Like, look at the satyrs. This game's equivalent of a satyr is probably the wolvers, because they're very aggressive, they're very evasive, and they're very dangerous if you let them do what they like to do. But if you're aggressive and you rush them down, they can't do much, because you're too busy building status elements and stunning them and knocking them around and putting them in a bad place. What did you do to the satyrs? You grabbed them. What happens when you grab the satyrs? They fought you. And what did you do? You had a little minigame where you tapped the button, and then they pushed you away. And what did you immediately do after they pushed you away? You grabbed them again, because you knew when they were grabbing you, you were invincible, you were doing a bit of damage to them at the end of it, and you were completely stopping them from doing any of their bullshit. And that's why satyrs are one of the scarier enemies in that game, because they're an enemy that when you let them do things, they're scary. They do all kinds of flippy garbage and multi-hit stuff, and they're very intimidating, and many players don't fight them because grabbing them's so effective. And then, of course, in God of War 3, there was 2 of them during a Cerberus fight, which was terrifying. And one of the hardest fights in that game, easily, because it was an enemy that you're so used to doing something for, and it didn't work. You had to treat them differently. And that's what God of War did really well, I think. In spite of its near invincible block, in spite of its incredibly casual parry, and in spite of, a lot of the encounters being very exploitable, it did a really good job of putting bad situations together that forced you outside of the comfort zones. And I think that this game does it as well, but I think it does it worse. I think a lot of the situations in this game that have been put together feel much more awkward than the other games do and don't have that natural flow to them. So there are a lot of moments of putting a revenant with enemies that it should never be with, that leads to these just really boring fights, or just sticking nightmares with enemies that are already far more capable and aren't necessarily needed, or a bunch of awkward enemies with a shield enemy, so when you're controlling the awkward enemies, the shield enemy knocks you away with the guard break and then someone else hits you. Things like that, like situations that are adding difficulty, but perhaps not the most elegant difficulty. Because there are some fights in this game that are tricky just because they're awkward to fight. Anything that's got any kind of AoE, like the Revenants. Like when the Revenants the Nightmares. When the Nightmare possesses somebody and they get ridiculous health regen and they get all the elite qualities that makes them not very fun to fight. Those fights, when they possess a normal enemy, are perfectly fine. You'll have an okay time with it. You'll have to beat them up a lot, you'll stun them, you'll get them out, you'll get rid, right? But when they go inside the heavies, and you can't do ult to them, and they take chip damage, and it's really hard to stun them, and it turns it into just... What is that fight at that point? I've got it in... was it the Volander Mines? You've seen me fight that odd. It's not a fun odd to fight, because it's just... There's no grace to it, there's nothing interesting to it. And the best way to get around it, as I mentioned in that video, is to walk all the way back to that point where they come out of the body for some reason. That's the best thing you can do. But when the best thing you can do is exploit a spawn mechanic, it tells you that it's just not as fun as it could be, right? And that's one of the things that I think harder difficulties nowadays can kind of get wrong. We've seen a resurgence of permadeath, we've seen a resurgence of difficulties trying to be like Souls games, but they're not Souls games. And like, I really feel like the people who love Dark Souls for difficulty are those superficial fans. And it's not a bad thing, and I'm not criticizing them, but I really feel like the people who are the champions of the difficulty of the Souls series are the people who aren't playing those games a lot. And loving them for what they are and understanding them at a much higher level. I feel like those are the people who play the game, it takes a long time for them to beat it, but they get a great sense of satisfaction on the other side, and then they move on, and they do other things. But they'll always have that summer where they beat that really hard game, and that will always be their go-to story, right? So everything from that point onwards is like, oh, it's not as bad as Dark Souls, though, is it? Or it's not as bad as Demon Souls, or whatever it was that they beat. I don't think that the person that goes back and plays it a lot and gets to the point where it just becomes like another video game. They understand the systems and it's not scary anymore, it's not intimidating anymore. They don't die as much outside of, stupid Souls deaths. I don't think they ever get to that point, those people. So, when other games adopt that kind of difficulty and those kind of decisions, I find it really hard to look at it as anything but a bad thing. And it doesn't have to be. That was amazing. I love everything about what just happened then. Wish that happened more often. 2 Revenants here though, guys. Hit them with an arrow, freeze them, and then kick them off the edge if you can. Be very careful though of their animations. I don't believe these Revenants like to attack you too much when it comes to the melee stuff, but the one who does with that 3-hit combo, very interesting. It's hard to see sometimes, and it's almost impossible to interrupt when she gets going. It can be very difficult to get any kind of parry on those moves. Can be done though. And now we get to do a little bit of puzzle solving. But I think a lot of the elements in this game that have been inspired by Souls are bad. Wholeheartedly, I think that. I really do. And I think it because of the order of things, the chronology. Like, going back to the Bill Hicks line of, it wasn't the Madonna video that inspired the hard-on that turned us into, debaucherous, lecherous people. It was the hard-on that inspired the Madonna video, right? Because it's titillating, it's very sexual, we're sexual animals and sex sells. And that's how it works. Pornography exists because we exist, not the other way around. And it stems from our nature, it stems from our impulses. God of War came before Souls games. A long time before Souls games. It came from a generation of games that were very fast, very reflex-based, skill-based, high skill ceilings, very demanding on players, very difficult, very challenging, very different to the popular trends of the time, but incredibly rewarding games before this idea of difficulty being rewarding was mainstream. And one of the things that they prioritized in these games was the responsiveness of the player's agency. So almost everything is cancelable. Almost everything you do is fast and quick and has punch. And it has all of these advanced mechanics that make it even better. So then when you come to this game, and you press R2, or triangle depending on what button scheme you use, and it takes Kratos like 5 seconds to do a fucking swing, and you're kind of wondering what the hell's wrong here? What's going on here? Why does Kratos feel so slow? Why do these moves feel so slow? Why does everything feel so slow? And then you realise they're going for the thing that Dark Souls was known for, the Souls series itself was known for. This idea of animations having priority, of animations having weight, animations being the kings and being uncancelable and leaving you vulnerable. But this is a fucking action game. This is not a Souls game. It's never been about that. So it's backwards to me. In my mind, that should never be a thing they ever aspire towards. But because that's the way that the gaming culture has gone, that's what people are interested in now. People want everything to feel visceral and realistic and have weight. They don't want like animations looking goofy because you can cancel them at any point. We learnt that with Quantum Break. People would prefer Max Payne 3 to Quantum Break when it comes to the aiming, which to me boggles my fucking mind, because mechanically it's inferior, but aesthetically it's much more pleasing. And that's it, isn't it? That's what it is. There are more people right now, seemingly, that have played Souls games than have played the early God of Wars. I was stunned to see just how many streamers on Twitch had never played God of War 1 and 2. Baffled my mind. It really did. I just couldn't believe it. And it was awesome to see them going back because this game was coming out. But we're now in a generation of people who associate more with God of War as a Souls-like game than as a pioneering cinematic action game. And that is so fucking backwards to me that it's sad. But this is now the gold standard. And notice I'm not saying that any of this is bad. I'm just saying that it's boggling to the mind. Because I think the combat in this game is okay. I think it has a lot of promise. And I think with further development and some adjustments, I think they could definitely be onto something interesting. But I don't think it's as good as the combat in the old games. And it's funny, because a lot of those people who would play this and probably compliment it for its combat and compliment it for its Souls influences are the same people that would call the old God of Wars a button masher. But they're the same people that call Bayonetta a button masher. And those are the people that you should never ever listen to, because they don't know what they're talking about.